Jack Russell, aka Werewolf by Night. Don't worry, kid, I'm a vegetarian.
Werewolf by Night, origin, explored. As fans patiently wait for this iconic werewolf to grace their screens and be part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we must first learn about the origins of Werewolf by Night. Just how deadly is he, and the role he plays in the Marvel Comics? In fact, with the release of Moon Knight on Disney+, his first comic appearance in a comics titled Werewolf by Night, number 32, becomes increasingly interesting, something that this video will later explore. Werewolf by Night, aka Jack Russell, is one of the deadliest werewolves in the history of Marvel, and here's everything you need to know about his character. In this video, we will explore Jack Russell, our heroic werewolf, and the comics that detail his experiences with Moon Knight. Before talking about his powers and abilities, let's begin, shall we? Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Werewolf by Night, Nightmarish origin. Just like Hollywood's Hays Code died in 1968, relaxing several rules around interracial dating and seductive dances, the Comic Code Authority also loosened some of its restrictions in 1971, and Marvel Comics was one of the first to seize this opportunity and make the most of it. Today, Marvel Comics are mainly popular for the superhero genre that revolves around A-listers like Iron Man, Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, Thor, and the likes. However, there's a comic book era where Marvel paired up with the horror genre to release some of the scariest and most interesting pieces of work, and we hope that some of these will be remembered and hopefully revived soon. One of the said examples being Morbius. After relaxation of the code, Marvel invested its time and money in horror, which led to the creation of Werewolf by Night, which in turn led to the introduction of Jack Russell to the Marvel Universe. He officially became the first character to be known as Werewolf by Night, and we are introduced to him in 1972's Marvel Spotlight number 2. However, exactly 1 year before the Comic Code Authority was created, Marvel Tales number 116 gave us a brief story about Werewolf by Night in 1953. This took place in 19th century Vienna, where a young man named Johann wishes to marry Bettina, but is worried about his lack of wealth. He stages a robbery which is interrupted by a werewolf, and despite fleeing, the werewolf finds Johann's home, where he seeks refuge for the night. The next morning, he turns into an ordinary man and blackmails Johann. Now, Johann robs the rich, and the werewolf feeds on them. The end of this comic reveals the werewolf to be Bettina's father. As you can tell, despite introducing Werewolf by Night, this comic didn't introduce Jack Russell in 1953. Flash forward to 1972, the comic begins with Russell in his werewolf form. After transforming back to his human form, he is convinced it was all a crazy dream until he visits his mother on her deathbed, where she reveals the untold secrets of his lycanthropic lineage. He learns of his father and how he was killed by the townsfolk after he lost control one night. Moving to the 1974 comic, Werewolf by Night number 15, Jack Russell learns more about his origins and his relationship to Marvel's Dracula. The first werewolf in Russell's family line was Transylvanian Grigory Rusov, who staked Dracula after the murder of his wife. This led to Dracula's servant, a werewolf, fighting Rusov and leaving him the cursed lycanthropy. Jack Russell's mother eventually remarried, which turned him into a Russell from a Rusov. However, the curse remained, and on his 18th birthday, he transformed into a werewolf. Moon Knight vs. Werewolf by Night. Werewolf by Night number 32 introduces Moon Knight, who made his most recent debut in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which makes it all the more exciting to revisit this particular comic. The story starts with Moon Knight in his attire, along with his silver claws, brutally attacking Werewolf by Night in the alleyway. Despite his cockiness, the werewolf is losing the battle as the silver claws are proving especially deadly. People watch as Moon Knight uses a silver blade and attacks the werewolf, who thinks about how the moon should be making him stronger, not cause him to lose a battle. Moon Knight repeatedly calls him a freak and gloats over his victory. We then see a flashback to the day before, when the werewolf had attacked Buck Cowan, his friend, but was trying to protect an innocent child. He then spent the rest of the night hiding under a rock, waiting for the blizzard to pass. The next morning, back to his human form as Jack Russell, he goes around trying to find his friend Buck, clearly having no memory of the night before. Meanwhile, we see doctors and nurses trying to save his life. Russell finally hitches a ride and reaches his stepfather's house by noon, who tells him about Buck's accident and how he was mauled by a creature and wasn't sure if he'd pull through. In a hurry, Jack reaches the hospital, where he finds out that Buck has slipped into a coma and they weren't sure if he'd recover from it. Jack then curses the moon and drives back home, where his father tells him that he has a visitor, who turns out to be none other than Moon Knight, and he says that he's there to do his job. He then begins to narrate his job, and we see a couple of men reviewing the dossier of a man named Mark Spector. He is given a costume that enhances his abilities, along with the possibility of $10,000 if he finishes the job, which is to capture and deliver Jack Russell. He even gives him the option of doing it the easy way and going along with him willingly. But clearly, Russell turns that down and runs to the alleyway, transforming himself into a werewolf. Which brings us back to the present. The people who were watching finally decided to call the cops, while Moon Knight keeps winning the battle until Russell finally throws a punch with everything he has in him, causing Moon Knight to collapse for a moment before he gets up and throws his final punch. The comic ends with Moon Knight dragging the werewolf while everyone, including his sister, watches. We move on to issue number 33, which is a continuation of the previous issue with more Werewolf by Night versus Moon Knight. We see Moon Knight carrying the werewolf with one arm as he uses the other to climb the ladder to the helicopter. Meanwhile, the police order an open fire as they try to get them, but fail miserably. We also see a man in search of Raymond Coker, who played a very brief role in a previous comic. He used to be a werewolf who has since been cured. He visits a woman and narrates the story of how his aunt and uncle were murdered, and the only witness was their daughter. After telling her the whole story, the woman warns him, and the only person who can help him now is Jericho Drum. Meanwhile, Moon Knight is still climbing the ladder when the werewolf finally wakes up and pushes both of them off the ladder as they both fall into the ocean next to the pier. Despite the beating, the werewolf still had a lot of fight left in him. They get on the pier and he begins throwing punches, using all of his strength to try and defeat Moon Knight. Just when he thought he has defeated him, the darkness ends and he transforms into his human form. Jack Russell stood there as Moon Knight stared in disbelief. The helicopter returns as they once again begin climbing the ladder. As all this happens, Buck is still in a coma. And while he shows some progress, the doctors still have very little hope. After Moon Knight delivers Jack Russell, the bosses tell him that he can't pay him until they're sure the man is a werewolf. They had also managed to kidnap his sister, Lessa. The men reveal that they want to keep the werewolf as a pet for their personal use, to commit murders and crimes whenever required. And so they needed to wait until a full moon and make sure he was a werewolf. In a fit of rage, Russell turns into a werewolf, shocking everyone as the men hand Moon Knight his money for completing the job. This is when Moon Knight has a change of heart and realizes that these men are more beast than Russell could ever be. The werewolf escapes from the cage, and he, along with Moon Knight, fights these men, winning the battle. Jack Russell is now free, and Moon Knight has his money. What makes Jack Russell so deadly? Lycanthropy dates back for several centuries, while the Russoff lineage dates back to 1795, which led to Jack Russell becoming a werewolf. Being a werewolf accounts for the majority of his powers and abilities. However, it is important to note that there is a lot that comes with this, both good and bad, that Russell had to deal with over a series of comics, which makes him an incredibly deadly creature. Russell can transform himself into a werewolf as and when he pleases, which is usually accomplished by meditation. However, on a full moon night, his transformation, much like other werewolves, is involuntary and deadly. During a normal transformation, he can retain his intellectual abilities, but cannot do the same on a full moon night. Lycanthropy can be both a gift and a curse, but it comes with superhuman strength by which he can lift incredibly heavy objects, up to almost a ton on a full moon night when he is complete werewolf form. Superhuman strength also comes along with his ability to leap and jump because of his incredibly strong muscles. He also possesses superhuman agility, stamina, reflexes, and speed, which makes him more capable than the best human athlete, even in his intermediate form. Being a werewolf also sharpens his sense of smell, sight, and hearing, much like an actual wolf. He can smell a living creature from a distance of 100 feet, making them easy prey. His body tissues are harder as compared to normal human tissue, which means that he doesn't get wounded or physically affected as fast, or as terribly as humans do. His body can withstand bullets, falls, forces, and exposure to extremes of temperature without being injured, which poses extremely useful when it is put up against his enemies. His claws and teeth are extremely deadly and fatal to the human body, but along with that, they can also cut through other materials such as fabric and food. Jack Russell can heal 10 times faster than a human being and barely have a scar left behind. Even though Russell is mostly in control of his werewolf form, there are times he loses control, which holds him back in certain situations, but doesn't take away from how he's one of the strongest werewolves in the Marvel Comics. Most interesting facts you need to know about Marvel's Werewolf by Night. Werewolf by Night was a character created solely because of the demand for characters like him in the 1950s. The horror genre was at its peak, and Marvel was not one to be left behind. Stan Lee, the editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics, Les Daniels, a comic book historian, and Goodman, the founder of Marvel Comics, would notice what was selling and put a lot of books out of the same type, which included horror titles like Marvel Tales, where Werewolf by Night was introduced as a character in the early 1950s. The production of more tales of this character was halted until 1972, when the Comic Code Authority loosened its restrictions. More recently, comic fans were anticipating Werewolf by Night to make his first appearance in the Marvel Cinematic Universe after the release of Moon Knight was announced. The MCU is known for some of its cameos, whether they play a major role or a small glimpse at the end of credit scenes. However, the fans weren't lucky enough to see Werewolf by Night make his debut in the MCU yet, but all hope isn't lost. In the second episode of Moon Knight, there's a small nod to the comic Werewolf by Night number 32, which is a classic Jack Russell vs. Moon Knight comic. Fans spotted this Easter egg and grew hopeful, and while Russell didn't appear in this season of Moon Knight, he might be in the future. Moon Knight isn't the only MCU connection that Jack Russell has. Russell has fought Spider-Man in a Marvel comic team-up number 12, and Iron Man in Werewolf by Night number 42. However, Marvel is currently in the phase of reinventing this character before its possible debut in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It has been written by Taboo, who is a member of the Black Eyed Peas, which certainly makes it more interesting. This time around, the character will be a Native American who is Taboo's pick. At the moment, we were unsure of how the Werewolf by Night will look when they finally make a debut on our screens. As we know, most Marvel characters end up joining a group of some sort within a universe. Some comprise of heroes like the Avenger, and some are the supervillains like the Thunderbolts. Similarly, Werewolf by Night is a part of Legion of Monsters, along with the Morbius, Ghost Rider, a Mummy, and Man-Thing, making it an interesting and deadly mix of monsters. Deadly and terrifying versions of Werewolf by Night in various forms of media explored. Marvel is a universe that goes beyond just TV shows, films, and comics. Originally, what began as comics for children is now one of the biggest conglomerates that exist in the world. And just like other Marvel characters, Werewolf by Night, aka Jack Russell, has also made its appearance felt beyond the comics, and in other forms of media as well. As for television, Werewolf by Night appeared in the Superhero Squad show, which ran from the year 2009 to 2011. With a total of 53 episodes, he appeared in the episode called This Man-Thing, This Monster, and was voiced by Rob Paulson. Given the fact that Werewolf by Night and Man-Thing belong to the Legion of Monsters, it would make sense for him to appear in this particular episode of the series. He also goes on to appear in Ultimate Spider-Man, which was an animated series loosely based on the comics. This time around, he was voiced by Ross Lynch, and this version of the Werewolf by Night stays in his werewolf form the whole time, and is in complete control of it. Jack Russell has been a fan favorite in the Marvel Comics, and there's no doubt that this werewolf is capable of beating some of the stronger Marvel characters. It almost makes one wonder if they're keeping his debut aside for something bigger, to put him up against someone stronger. There are endless possibilities, and there is still a question mark about his appearance in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It is still worth looking for Easter eggs related to this character in upcoming projects. Until he becomes part of the MCU, there are still several independent Werewolf by Night comics, along with his appearances in other comics that can be read and explored, showing you different versions of this character. And if you like our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.